Hari Om Nanaji. Hari Om Nanaji annaru.
Hari Om, everybody.
Nana, Miru.
Hari Om Nanaji.
Hari Om Talli. Chappu.
Miru earpods pettukunnara? Sorry. You can get started, Nana. You unmute yourself and start.
Okay.
Andaru bagunnaru, Nana?
Anta bagunnamma.
Okay,
Shema
Ma.
kuda improving.
Very good.
Yeah.
Nice.
Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dvandvatitam Gagana Sadrusham Tattvamashyadilaksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvadhi Sakshibhutam Bhavatitam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tam Namami Shruti Smruti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram Shankaram Shankaracharyam Keshavam Badarayanam Sutra Bhashya Krutau Vande Bhagavanto Punah Punaha Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Vande Guru Paramparam Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Chaiva Tato Jayamudirayet. Brahmara, you people can start on the verse 50. This verse 50 and the commentary thereof is very profound, and it talks of the Jnana Nishta, which will knock off the mistaken impressions most of us may be having about ourselves. Ourselves means Atma. And whatever we think of Atma, that may be, there is an element of confusion, there is an element of doubt, there is an element of unpreparedness to accept the truth of Atma. All those things are going to be very amply covered, very extensively covered in the commentary for this verse. It requires your undivided attention, and you will benefit from the knowledge of the substance covered in the commentary. Okay?
Yeah.
All the best. If you have any doubt, you stop the speaker and ask.
Okay.
Right.
Siddhim prapto yatha brahma tatha noti nibodhame samasenaiva kaunteya nishtha jnanasya ya para. Here, the accomplishment, siddhi, is preparedness of mind, antakarana shuddhi. Shankara says that it is characterized by an eligibility of the body and senses for a commitment to knowledge, and that eligibility is the result of the grace earned by worshipping Ishvara through doing one's own duty. This restatement of what was said before, Swakarmana tam abhyarcha siddhim vindati manavaha is for the sake of what comes later. Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. What is born of the grace of Ishvara is that his mind, body, and senses do not create any disturbance in him. This is the greatest grace that you can think of. If you look into it, it amounts to looking at yourself nicely rather than looking down upon yourself. We always think we need grace for this and that, but all we really require is that the mind, body, and senses be available for us when we need them. This implies not only mental purity, antakarana shuddhi, but the cooperation of the body too. If the body falls apart, what is the use of the mind having grace? You need not enjoy an especially healthy body, but then it should be available to serve the needs of your pursuit and not interfere with it. The mind must be clean and the body should be fit. Both of these require grace. What is it that the one who has gained this accomplishment, siddhim praptaha, going to accomplish later? He gains Brahman, Brahma apnoti, in the form of certainty of knowledge. How does he gain that? What is the means whereby this karma yogi, enjoying this accomplishment of mental purity, but who, nevertheless, considers himself a doer, karta, gains the knowledge of Brahman? Lord Krishna says, please understand from me. Is he going to start another 17 chapters? No. He is going to explain it briefly. Samasena. All that he has said before is going to be presented in an essential form so that Arjuna can keep it in his mind and do what is to be done. Gain of Brahma is nothing but certainty of knowledge. What is that gain of Brahman, Brahma Prapti? It is nothing but knowledge of Brahman, which is the ultimate end of knowledge. Jnanasya ya paranishtha. The culmination of a pursuit is its nishtha. Generally, the pursuit of knowledge has no end to it. You come to know only a little more than what you knew before, and even more about what you do not know. Previously, you did not know that you did not know, and now you know something about how much you do not know. Thus, there is no end for any type of knowledge except knowledge of the self, Atma. Because Atma is partless, you cannot have partial knowledge of Atma and still call it knowledge. It is possible to be mistaken about Atma because it is always available, Nitya Prasiddha. But it is not possible to have partial knowledge of the real nature of Atma, it being totally free from parts. Therefore, knowledge of the Atma is the only knowledge that has culmination, Nishtha. Every other knowledge is inconclusive. It has parts because the object of any knowledge necessarily has attributes. Being dependent upon something else, mithya, any object of knowledge is nothing but attribute. There is no substantive in the world for everything that we call a substantive becomes an attribute. Upon inquiry, implying another substantive. In a clay pot, pot is only an attribute of the substantive called clay. But even the clay is not a substantive. It is only an attribute of the substantive called atom. Any form is going to be reducible like this. Therefore, The formless alone can be a substantive, and that happens to be yourself. Knowledge of yourself, then, is the only conclusive knowledge possible, and therefore the most exalted, para. In what order you will gain that knowledge? Bhagavan is going to tell here, and thus he draws the attention of Arjuna saying, learn from me, nibodha me. But first, Shankara has a very interesting and important bhashya here, which we will look into carefully. What is the nature of Jnana Nishtha? Shankara has characterized the certainty of knowledge, Jnana Nishtha, as where the knowledge of Brahman ends. Now the question is raised, what is the nature of this certainty of knowledge, Jnana Nishtha? Shankara says that in whichever form the knowledge of Atma is, the certainty, Nishtha, is in that form. What we are calling Jnana Nishtha is not different from knowledge of Atma. The next question is, what is the nature of this knowledge of Atma, Atma Jnana? Shankara says that whatever the nature of Atma is, that is the nature of Atma Jnana. Between the knowledge of Atma and Atma, there cannot be any difference. For knowledge is always as true as the object. If one asks, what is the nature of this Atma? Shankara says that it is in the form in which it was told by Bhagavan through the sentences of the Gita as well as the Upanishads.
Shall I take over, Brahmara?
No, not required.
Okay.
Shankara says that it is in the form in which it was told by Bhagavan through the sentences of the Gita as well as the Upanishads and by reasoning. Here, Shankara can answer that the nature of Atma is Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. But he does not.
Brahmara, if you want, I'll take over.
Bela is there. Bela is there.
For a little while. For a little while, yeah. I'll take over, then either you or Bela can take over. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Here, Shankara can answer that the nature of Atma is Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma. But he does not, because his topic is the nature of the knowledge. We should also make a note that when Shankara talks of reasoning here, he means that what is said should be reasonable. What is said by the Shastra is examined and ascertained to be not against reason. If any other interpretation of Atma is proposed, he will show the fallacy in that proposal through reasoning. Is Atma Jnana possible? Now, in this commentary, there will be various objections and opponents of Vedanta who will be raising their own points of view, and Shankara will very patiently listen to all those things and refute them, and very reasonably so. That is where your attention will be required. Only thing is, you will have to know whether Shankara is speaking or the opponent of Vedanta is speaking. So you should not miss that line of that argumentation. Is Atma Jnana possible? Since Atma has no form, self-knowledge is not possible. The objection. An objection is raised here. It has been said that knowledge is always in the form of the object of knowledge. The knowledge of a pot, for example, is going to be as good as the pot. In that, when you know a pot, the knowledge you have of the pot will be in keeping with the nature of the pot. It cannot be different. If it is, you will not understand the pot as a pot. Therefore, it is well known that knowledge assumes the form of the object. But nowhere is it accepted that Atma is an object or that it has a form. The self is not an object. But if it were, who would be the subject? Being yourself. Atma is never an object which you can objectify. By nature, it's not subject to objectification. In that case, if it is not an object, how are you going to gain knowledge of it when knowledge is always in keeping with the object? Further, for knowledge to take place, the object of knowledge must have a form. But Atma, according to you, as pure consciousness, has no form. If Atma neither has a form nor is an object, how are you going to know it? It is not like a pot, which is both an object and has form, and therefore can be known. Even an atom has its own attribute through which you can know it because you can objectify it, not sensorially, but inferentially. It is an object of knowledge for you, the subject, which is distinct from what you objectify. You are not an atom. You are objectifying an atom, and it is identifiable in a given form. But what about Atma? It has no particular form, nor is it an object. How are you going to gain knowledge of that Atma? And if you cannot gain the knowledge of Atma itself, where is the question of gaining Jnana Nishtha, the certainty in that knowledge? In Ekadeshi's view that it does have a form. This Ekadeshi, see, there are a lot of people who object to the Vedanta's treatment of the subject. This Ekadeshi does not belong to any particular school of thought. The various schools of thought are, one is Sankhya, like the Kapila's philosophy, and Vaisheshika, that is Kannada's philosophy, the Buddhas, etc., etc. But this Ekadeshi does not belong to any one of those schools of thought. He is a kind of a freelancer, but a reasonable opponent of Vedanta or a reasonable questioner, right? In Ekadeshi's view that it does have a form. Someone offers an answer here, citing the Shastra, a meditator, an upasaka says that Atma does have a form. What is that form? It is in the form of the sun, Aditya Varna. It is in the form of light, Bharupa. It is self-shining, Swayam Jyotihi. If Atma is in the form of self-shining light, he argues, it must have a form because fire, whose nature is light, is the first element in the sequence of creation that has form. The first element is space, Akasha, and the second is air, Vayu, neither of which has a form. Next is fire, Agni, which is the first to have a form. Since Atma is said to be light, special property of fire, why should we not consider that Atma has a form? This is the Ekadeshi's point of view. Another Ekadeshi's view, another person, another freelancer, another participant in the discussion answers that this is not true because such statements are meant only to negate the inertness. This is where we ought to be very careful. This is not being answered by Shankara nor by the Vedanta. It is being proposed by another Ekadeshi. Okay? Ekadeshi need not be considered as an opponent of Vedanta, but a person who has his own point of view. They point out that Atma is not inert, Jada, and is beyond the darkness of ignorance. Tamasaha parastat. The Shruti specifically says this immediately after saying it is like the sun, Aditya Varna, in order to say that it is not ignorance, nor is it inert, nor does it need to be illumined by anything else. He explains that If forms like substance and attribute are negated from Atma, one can conclude that is in the form of ignorance or darkness. It is to negate this argument that these statements are made. Besides that, form is specifically negated by very clear statements such as arupa, without form. Shankara answers, Atma can never become an object. Further, there is form only for an object that you can objectify, and there are equally unambiguous statements that say that Atma is not available for any objectification. Statements like, there is nothing equivalent to its form, no one sees it with the eye, na sandrishyet tishtati rupamasya, na chakshusha pashyati kaschana enam. These are from the Upanishads, okay? The footnotes are very clearly given as to from where the quotation has been given by Shankaracharya. And without sound, without touch, ashabdham, asparshyam, tell us that Atma is free from being an object of our sight, our ears, our sense of touch, or any other sense organ. From all these statements of the Shruti, we understand that Atma is not an object. Therefore, he concludes, knowledge enjoying the form of Atma is not tenable. How can there be knowledge of Atma when it is well known that any given cognition is the form of that given object, and Atma has been repeatedly said to be without form, nirakara. Knowledge must be in keeping with the object. If it is knowledge of a pot, it is in the form of a pot. If it is knowledge of a cloth, it is in the form of a cloth. Thus, each piece of knowledge is in the form of the object. But here, we're talking about an Atma that is free from form, and thus knowledge of Atma is not possible. Having argued that both Atma and the knowledge of Atma have no form, his question is, how are you going to gain self-knowledge, Atma Jnana, leave alone Nishtha in that knowledge? For Nishtha, you need to contemplate upon the knowledge in order to make it certain. What can you contemplate upon here? It is something like saying that cancer can be cured by an extract of rabbit's horn. Similarly, if you gain Atma Jnana, samsara will disappear. The only problem is it is not possible. How are you going to gain Atma Jnana when Atma is neither an object for you to know, nor has a form for you to objectify? Once I know, I am free, but then Atma is not available for such knowledge. Therefore, there is no moksha. There is no moksha by knowledge. And we have to look for another solution. It is pointless to talk about contemplation because to be contemplated upon, the Atma must have some form, but it is formless. Without a form, there is no cognition, vritti, and without a cognition, what are you going to contemplate upon to gain nishtha? If I ask you to think of Atma, what will you think of? If it is a form, if it is like a flame or like a sound, it is possible to think of it. But if it has no form, what are you going to think of? Even if Atma cannot be objectified, its existence is well known. Shankara answers this in the following manner. He says that the conclusion that has been reached is not true. While it is true that Atma is not available for objectification, its presence is available. It is known to you because it is self-evident. It is present in the mind, buddhi, which has the capacity to reflect consciousness, which is Atma. The whole argument of the opponent here is on the basis of Atma not being an object because it has no form. True, it has no form, but it exists. In spite of not being an object and having no particular attribute, still it exists. How do we know this? Like your face in a mirror, the consciousness that is Atma is reflected in the buddhi because It is made of a subtle substance that has the capacity to reflect consciousness. That it applies to buddhi, the reflection or manifestation of consciousness in the buddhi is non-separate from the consciousness that is the Atma. This is because the reflection and the Atma are one and the same. There is no reflection which is totally separate from the Vastu because the reflection is not a real entity. When you stand before the mirror, it is you that is seen, even though two entities seem to be there. Similarly, the buddhi is made up of such a subtle substance that it is able to reflect or manifest this consciousness, and therefore consciousness appears reflected there. Because of the reflection of the consciousness alone, the body, mind, and senses are conscious. The I thought, aham vritti, which is the buddhi, becomes conscious because it reflects the consciousness of the self, and so too this thought, idam vritti, in the mind. Then again, because the mind is in association with the sense organs, they also become conscious. When the senses become conscious, the body becomes conscious because one sense organ, the sense of touch, is all over the body. Through the sense of touch,
Nana will take over, Nana.
Huh?
May I take over?
Yeah,
Okay.
let Bela take over.
Yeah, Hari Om Nana Ji, everybody. Through the sense of touch, the whole body becomes aglow with consciousness, like an iron ball becomes aglow with the brilliance and heat of fire. Atma does not need to be known to you as conscious and existent by any other form, any other means of knowledge. It is already evident. The only problem is that because consciousness, which is the nature of Atma, pervades the entire body, people think the body is Atma. Because consciousness is present in this body, because the consciousness is present in the body, if you touch the body, actually it is Atma you are touching. Though the body is inert, jada, in both the hand that touches and the hand you are touching, there is consciousness. Because Atma is there, you are there. There is no difference between the reflection of consciousness, abhasa, and consciousness, chaitanya. Though the reflection, abhasa, is consciousness, while consciousness, chaitanya, is not the reflection. Therefore, in the physical body, the reflection, abhasa, there is chaitanya. That is the Atma. This is why Shankara says that people in general who have not inquired into the Shastra and therefore do not have any discrimination think that the physical body alone is the Atma. Without any vichara, inquiry, the body is taken to be the Atma, and that is natural because the body, Deha, is conscious. It is very natural to conclude that this conscious body in me is me and everything else is other than myself. How can you say Atma is unknown? In fact, the body is not really taken to be Atma. It is only because of the consciousness there that I look at the body and say, this is me. What I identify myself as is nothing but the conscious being. Therefore, that consciousness, which is the Atma, is known already. The problem with taking the Atma to be the body alone is that it is going to be subject to aging, illness, and death as the body is. This conclusion is due to lack of discrimination, aviveka. Since Atma is already known, but wrongly we have to do the negation of all that it is not in the form of neti neti. Then whatever remains as the innermost self, Pratyagatma, is told to be Brahman. Ayam Atma Brahma. That is the teaching, Upadesha, wherein the cognition, the vritti, that Atma is Brahman, removes ignorance and goes away. Once the vritti has removed ignorance of the Atma, you do not need a special vritti to know Atma, for Atma is always present in any vritti. Only the Chaitanya, the consciousness that is reflected in the vritti, is called Jnana. It is important to understand here that the vritti itself is not Jnana. Even when we talk of pot knowledge, knowledge belongs to consciousness alone because the knowledge aspect is consciousness. The qualifying is done by a name and form, nama and rupa. Therefore, every vritti has the presence of consciousness. In the knower consciousness, knowledge consciousness, known consciousness, in all the three, one consciousness alone is present. Therefore, there is no way of missing Atma at any time. One takes body, etc., as Atma of the presence of consciousness. According to a mechanical materialist, the body alone is Atma. Deha eva Atma. Another materialist, Lokayatika, says that the physical body is endowed with or is qualified by consciousness. The body enjoying the attribute of consciousness is the Atma. When the body is dead, the consciousness, Chaitanya, goes away and there is no longer an Atma. For others, the senses, Indriyas, enjoying consciousness are the Atma. These are also Karvakas.
Charvakas.
Karvakas.
Charvakas.
These are also Charvakas.
Hari Om. One way to read this carefully is whenever there is on top of a letter a horizontal bar that requires some dirgha. Cha, see, A is there. On the A there is a top horizontal bar. Cha, that char vakas. Like that earlier one you have read Lokayatika. This is Lokayatika. Okay?
Okay,
Go.
Nanaji.
Go
Loka, and this
yeah.
is
Yeah, go ahead.
Charvakas,
Hmm.
who have thought about this Atma and have concluded that the senses, Indriyas, and are Atma. They contend that merely the body alone cannot be the Atma because without the functioning of the senses, the body cannot function, as in sleep. Therefore, the senses are the real Atma. Another Charvaka says that the mind is the Atma. Because of reflection of the mind in the sense organs and body, they also become conscious. Therefore, according to him, the mind is Atma. Then there are others, the Kshanika Vijnanavadis, who say that the flickers of consciousness of obtaining in the buddhi in the form of vrittis are the Atma. The vritti alone is Atma. Still others say that Atma is interior to the buddhi. The buddhi is only an effect, karya, while Atma is its cause, karana. In deep sleep, Atma is available, but the buddhi is not. And
Hari
therefore,
Om. This is Karana. Karana is a cause. Karana is the implement. Okay,
Okay,
Karana. That A
yes.
has got the horizontal bar on top. So that requires a dirgha, Karana.
Okay, Kshamyatam. Karana. In deep sleep, Atma is available, but the Buddhi is not. And therefore, the existence of Atma does not depend on the Buddhi. Through the method of invariable concomitance and discontinuance, Anvaya Vyatireka, they arrive at the conclusion that whatever obtains in deep sleep is the Atma, the unmanifest, the avyakta, the undifferentiated, avyakrita,
Avyakrita.
avyakrita, the undifferentiated, avyakrita state of ignorance is taken as the Atma. Those people who do not recognize the Atma as independent of avidya see avidya as the intrinsic attribute of Atma. Since Atma is known to all, is there a need for an injunction to know it? Now, in all these situations, whether the buddhi or the body is taken as Atma, one thing is certain. The cause for the error about Atma is the reflection of the consciousness, that is Atma. Therefore, one can say that knowledge for which Atma is the object is not subject to any kind of injunction, vidhi. Unless an object is totally unknown to you, you cannot be enjoined to know it. I can legitimately say that you must know a mangosteen. A mangosteen, for example, because you have no idea as to what it is. Whereas to say that Atma has to be known by you, gnanatavya, gnatavya, Gnatavya is not because it is not something totally unknown. Agnanata, Agnata, Kshamyatam, Agnata. In the body, the senses, mind, and even the unmanifest condition, Avyakta is the reflection, abhasa, of the consciousness, which is the Atma. They are all conscious because they enjoy the reflection of consciousness. And because of this reflection, there is the delusion that each one is Atma. Why do I take the body as the Atma? It is because this consciousness is there. I am a conscious being who is conscious of the world, and this consciousness seems to have a limit, the physical body. I become one column of consciousness, one individual consciousness. The body being conscious, it is but natural for a person to take the body as the Atma. So too, it is natural to take the Pranti as the Atma.
Prana as the Atma.
Prana as the Atma. It is natural, so too it is natural to take the prana as the Atma, the mind as the Atma, the senses as the Atma, the buddhi as the Atma, because they are all conscious. The unmanifest avyakta is also taken as the Atma, since the state of deep sleep is an experience which everybody has to account for. The basis for all these delusions about the Atma is the reflection of consciousness in these various media. Because it is not totally unknown, someone comes to the conclusion here that the knowledge of Atma need not be enjoined. Going one step further, he questions, if this is so, why should we have such Shruti statements as the self, my dear, is to be seen, listened to, against contentions and contemplated upon. Atma va are
Atma vare drashtavyaha
drashtavya, drashtavya, shrotavya, nantavya, mantavya. Am I correct? Atma va are drashtavya,
It is
shrotavya,
actually, it is sorry,
mantavya.
ma'am. Atma vare drashtavyaha shrotavyaha mantavyaha nididhyasitavyaha.
This is a famous statement by Yajnavalkya in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, when he was teaching his wife Maitreyi, who wanted to know what is Atma. This is what he said. Atma va are drashtavyaha, shrotavyaha, mantavyaha, nididhyasitavyaha. Hey Maitreyi, Atma va are means, hey my dear Maitreyi. Are means it's a kind of an affinity Shraddha it is. Drashtavyaha, it must be seen. Shrotavyaha, it must be heard. Mantavyaha, you must do manana of that. And nididhyasitavyaha, you must contemplate on that. Yeah. This is
So
a famous
beautiful.
statement from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad.
Yeah, it is Sambodhana, correct, Nanaji?
Atma va are drashtavyaha, shrotavyaha, mantavyaha, nididhyasitavyaha.
Astu. Atma va are drashtavyah, srotavyah, mantavyah, nididhyasitavyah.
Yeah. The
In this
tavya
state,
is a kind of an injunction. It shall be followed. Okay?
Astu. Yes, Nanaji. Atma vare drashtavyah, shrotavyah, mantavyah, nididhyasavyah. In this statement, the suffix tavya, indicating a command, is repeatedly used. If Atma is already known, such a statement would be meaningless. Then he asks finally the question he is really driving at. Why should we even say Shruti if Atma is already known? Even though the Atma is prasiddha, there is confusion about it. It is true that Atma is not to be known like an object, like mangoes. A confusion about Atma, and that confusion alone is to be removed. Because Atma is well known, prasiddha for everybody. Anybody can take it for anything. Atma is the most abused word in this world and also the object of utmost concern for anyone. If you say that you are not concerned about yourself, but about your father, I will ask you, why are you concerned about your father? If you say it is because he is not well, then I would say that he should be concerned about that and not you. If you then say that if he is not well, you cannot be happy, then my question would be about whom are you concerned? Then you have to answer that you are concerned only about yourself, even when you are concerned about your father. There are many objects in the world about which we have various degrees of concern. But if there is one word whose object receives our utmost concern, that is Atma, I. At the same time, it is the word about which there is the most confusion. In fact, all the concern is due to the confusion. Because there is confusion, there is concern, and the concern reveals that there is confusion. Therefore, the Shastra enjoins us to resolve the confusion. The concern of mortality, aging, being nobody, and thus wanting to prove that I am somebody are all concerned on I. And this concern is what we call samsara. Samsara can be summed up as concern about yourself, and this concern is due to confusion. Therefore, Atma is not unknown, it is known but not properly, not as it really is. There is no injunction, vidhi, that Atma be known as an object, for it is already known, but wrongly. You are committing a mistake, and therefore only the correction of the mistake has to be done. The Shruti draws your attention to this in its statements of negation. Neti, neti. Anything which you think is Atma is not Atma.
Bella,
Removal of.
take over.
No, it is okay. I hope my internet is okay.
And internet is okay. There is some little sound coming on and off from your side. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's your earpods.
No, I'm talking directly. I have not used any earphones.
There is some minor disturbance. That's all.
Yeah. Should I continue?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Removal of superimpositions alone is Atmagna. Shankara says all that has to be done is the removal of all that is being superimposed upon the Atma. What is superimposed? All that we have mentioned, which can be summed up as name and form, Nama Rupa. Atma is mistaken for avidya or avyakta, the unmanifest cause, then variously as the effect in the form of the mind, functioning either as buddhi or manasa, which is vritti, that has no existence apart from the Atma. Being superimposed, none of these is real. Similarly, indriyani, the senses, deha, the body, etc., all of which are not Atma, are superimposed upon Atma. And that superimposition has to be removed by knowledge. Here, Shankara elaborates here what he said in his opening statement, that Atma can never become an object, in order to make it very clear. He says that what has to be accomplished is not knowledge of the consciousness, which is Atma, but the removal of the superimposition of the Anatma, that is the Nama Rupas, on the Atma. Nama Rupadi Anatma अध्यरूपाना निवृत्ति एव कार्या न आत्मा चैतन्य विज्ञानम. क्षम्यताम, I will just read again. On the Atma, Nama Rupadi Anatma Adhyarupana Nivritti Eva Karya Na Atma Chaitanya Vijnanam.
Balaji, what it reads is, what we need to know, Bhagavan Shankara is saying, Nama Rupas will have to be negated on the Atma. Nama Rupadi Anatma Adhyaropana Nivrittihi Eva Karya Na Atma Chaitanya Vijnanam.
Astu
Go forward with such straightforward, etc.
Yes, with such straightforward statements as these, one wonders Where do people get the idea that there is a super consciousness that is to be known? They say that beyond the body is a mind, beyond that a buddhi, and beyond all that a super consciousness that you should realize. But Shankara says very clearly here that you need not gain knowledge of the consciousness that is Atma. Why? Because that is one thing which is present all the time. When you see something or hear something or smell something, and when you do not experience anything at all, consciousness, which is Atma, is present. Then what do we have to do? We have to remove the varieties of notions we have superimposed upon Atma. How? By inquiry, vichara into what is Atma and what is not with the help of Shastra. Atma is commonly taken as the various things that are superimposed upon it by ignorance of its swarupa, in such forms as the mind, as eyes and as ears, in anything you see, anything you encounter, in that form, the consciousness that is Atma is always present, prasiddha. It is known to everyone, including the Buddhist, the Charvaka, and the naturalist, as qualified by the mind or by the sense organs or by the body. Whatever be the school of thought, all that they do is adding a qualification to the Atma. Even a person who has not thought about it has some conclusion about the Atma, which is wrong. Being known to everybody with all these superimpositions, Atma is not to be known as we usually understand knowing, but is to be known in a special way. That is, by removing all the erroneous notions about it, It is already known, but with confusion, and therefore removal of the confusion is what is called Atma Jnana. There is no objectification of the Atma. That is why it is said in the Kenopanishad that he who says he knows the Atma does not know the Atma, because he who says he does not know the Atma also does not know. But even though he says he does not know the Atma, the one who says so is the Atma. Atma is always prasiddha, evident to one. And therefore, knowledge of the Atma is not one of an aprasiddha vishaya at any time. Suppose you have knowledge of a crystal. Previously, it was not known by you, and now it is. Therefore, in your mind, the vritti, the thought is there, for which the object is the crystal. This is knowledge. It is the same for any knowledge of a particular object.
Nana, can you just explain this thing over here, which says in the Kenopanishad that he is the one who says he knows the Atma does not know the Atma. Of course, he who says he does not know the Atma also does not know. But even though he says he does not know the Atma, the one who says so is the Atma. Okay. Got it. Yeah. Bela, are
It
you
is
there?
a well-known fact.
Huh?
It's good. When you read it, it is very good. Second time.
Yeah. I've understood that. Yeah. Vela, you continuing?
Yeah. Suppose you have knowledge of a crystal. Previously it was known by you and now it is. Therefore,
it was
in your
not
mind,
known by you. Sorry, Bella. Previously, it was not known by you, and now
Yeah.
it is. Yeah.
Previously it was not known by you and now it is. Therefore, in your mind, the vritti, the thought is there for which the object is the crystal. This is knowledge. It is the same for any knowledge of a particular object. Now, suppose I say you must gain knowledge of the consciousness, which is Atma. What will you do? How can consciousness, which is Atma, in which the seer and all forms of knowledge and all objects of knowledge shine as an object, like the crystal? Oh, it is a question, sorry. How can consciousness, which is Atma, in which the seer and all the forms of knowledge and all objects of knowledge shine as an object, like the crystal? That is the only thing you do not need to know as an object. That in which all the vrittis of all objects are illumined, which is the very nature, swarupa of every vritti, is the consciousness which is Atma. You cannot objectify this consciousness because it is the one thing which is not available as an object, nor it is necessary for you to objectify.
Belaji, can I take over?
Nanaji, I can go ahead if it is convenient. I
Okay.
can go ahead, Nanaji.
Yeah, continue the good work.
Nor it is necessary for you to objectify it. Buddhists say Buddhi vritti is Atma because it reflects consciousness. Shankara says that it is because of this fact, that is the reflection of consciousness, is available in every vritti, that the Buddhists, the Kshanika Vijnanavadis, take the vritti as the Atma. In their view, only momentary consciousness is available at any given time. When you see me right now, for example, it looks as though I have been sitting here for the past several minutes. I seem to be shining in your mind constantly, but it is not true. Your mind is moving and the vrittis keep on changing. It seems as though the same person sitting here because of memory. But what really happens is that the vrittis in your mind keep changing like the frames in a movie, because the vritti is imbued with consciousness and is momentary. The Buddhist concludes that the Atma is a momentary flicker of consciousness. In taking the vritti as Atma, he is not incorrect, but he is not correct in saying that Atma is the vritti. Once he takes the Atma as the vritti, then the Atma is also momentary, like the vritti, and therefore Atma has no reality other than the vritti. In fact, there is no Atma. That is why he says that the Atma is nothing but flickers of consciousness, and that there is no object outside, only a vritti that keeps changing like in the dream, and there is no Atma. Outside is a concept, as is inside. In this view, all we have is a concept, and the concept keeps on changing. If there is a semblance of continuity, that is the delusion. Momentary existence is the reality. If one were to ask, how can the vritti be known if there is no knower? He has an answer for that. He says that no other means of knowledge is required because he accepts that, being consciousness, The vritti has the status of being known by itself. When it obtains, it is self-revealing. It does not require anything else. For him, there is no dependence upon any other pramana, which means no knower is necessary. We also say that Atma is self-revealing, but it is not momentary. How do you know that a flicker of consciousness is the Atma? The flicker cannot know because it only exists for a moment and goes away. It does not know that it is changing. In its view, the next moment has not come, and the flicker was not there previously to know of its own arrival. There is no way to logically account for this view. Therefore, Shankara says only the negation of the superimposition onto Brahman due to ignorance has to be done. No effort has to be made for the knowledge of Brahman because it is absolutely prasiddha. There is no question of how to experience there is no question of how to experience Brahman because everything is experienced in Brahman and you are that Brahman. There is no effort involved here, only negation. And the negation does not require effort because it is not like sweeping to remove the dirt from the floor. We are not trying to remove some impurity from the Atma because it is always pure, Shuddha. The removal here is purely like the removal of the snake upon the rope. The kind of effort you have to make for that is the effort you have to make here. All you have to do is remove the properties superimposed upon Atma, which really belong to what is not Atma, that is the Anatma Dharma. No other effort is required because Brahman, which is Atma, is very well known. Atyanta Prasiddha. In the sense that nothing else is more known to you, is more present or more available. Once the superimpositions are removed, it is known as limitless because all the limitations that were nothing but superimpositions are removed from it.
Okay, Balaji, relax. I will take over.
Shall I read, Nana?
Yeah, well, I will read for some time, then you come in.
Okay.
Right? If no effort is needed, why is Brahman not known? If there is no effort involved in gaining knowledge of Brahman, why does everyone not know it? Shankara says it's because the mind is robbed away by the various modes of names and forms. One mistakes Atma for any one of them and thinks Atma is a doer, karta, enjoyer, bhokta, ignorant, ajnani, etc. But even for those people whose mind is robbed away, Brahman is totally present all the time. The most easy to know and the very nearest. There's nothing nearer than the Atma because it is yourself. Even so, for those whose mind is robbed away like this, it is to be known. If discrimination is lacking, what is present seems to be not present and difficult to understand. What is nearest seems very far away and other than oneself. Brahman, which is Atma, which is always present, looks as though it is something to be accomplished, something to be reached after transcending everything. Even though it is the easiest thing to understand, it becomes difficult, complex. And even though it is the very nature of oneself, one always wants to look outward for it or wants to dive deep within for gaining this Atma. In some form, the person is always searching because of lack of discrimination, aviveka. Because his mind is occupied with varieties of things like heaven and other local things, he does not think that what he is seeking is himself. He thinks there is something other than himself that he has to gain, and therefore Atma is difficult to know. Durvigneya, for the adhikaris, Brahman is easily known. On the other hand, there are those whose minds are freed from concerns about external objects, who have discovered a certain objectivity in themselves. These people who are mature have gained two types of grace. One is the grace of the teacher, Guru Prasada. Some people think this means the Guru touches you somewhere and you get some special experience, as though he is transferring some power to you and awakening your Kundalini. This is all nonsense. They say everything is mithya, but this Kundalini, which is equally mithya, somehow becomes a satya. Any experience, including Kundalini, is mithya. It is within samsara. The grace of the teacher here is teaching, upadesha, of the meaning of the Mahamakya, Tattvamasi. Then you need Atma Prasada also. You have to bless yourself. If you look down upon yourself, what can the Shastra do by telling you that you are Brahman? You have to look upon yourself as the one who is fit to know this. Then alone is it available. For those who have this type of mind and a proper teacher, this twofold grace, there is nothing more well known, nothing that can be understood more easily, nothing more immanent. This was said in the same form in the 9th chapter. Pratyaksha dharmyam susukam kartum avyayam, that was mentioned by Kataya in the 9th chapter. This was too, which is not away from dharma and can be understood by living a life of dharma, is directly always available. That means that for these people, Satchit Anandam Brahma is the meaning of the word I, not anything else. With reference to consciousness, anything limited is negated. Anything inert is negated. If you think it is an effect, that is also negated. If you think it is a cause, that is also negated. If you think it is attached to something, it is negated. If you think it is located somewhere, it is also negated. Why all these are negated is because they are all superimpositions. These are called abhasa. What is superimposed? Like the snake on the rope, that is the abhasa. Snake is the abhasa on the real substance, which is the rope. And if you think it is time bound, that is also negated. Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma is Atma, and therefore there is nothing more well known, nothing nearer, nothing better, nothing else present other than this Brahman. Beautiful. As Buddhi cannot comprehend the formless Brahman, one should meditate on Saguna Brahman. Objection by Upasaka. The Upasaka, the meditator, he makes a point here. Now, I said, why all these objections are raised by Shankaracharya in the commentary is, we may have stated or unstated these kind of objections or doubts or Viparita Bhavana. To take care of all those things and make our minds absolutely certain about what we are seeking. That is how these objections are also raised on behalf of all of us. Now, a certain objection is raised by worshippers of Ishvara who are committed to meditation on Brahma with form, Saguna Brahma Upasana. A verse often quoted by some of them, the Bhagavatas. Bhagavatas is as follows. Bhagavatas means people who are kind of Vaishnavas, okay? They are not Vaidikas. Vaidikas are people who believe in the veracity of the Veda. Whereas Vaishnavas are those who are the believers that Bhagavan Vishnu eva Satyam Tadanyat Sarvam Mijyeti. That's how. That is the Bhagavatas. Kalau Kalmasha Chittanam Papa Dravyopajivinam Vidhi Kriya Vihinanam Harer Nahamaiva Kevalam. In the Kali Yuga, the name of Hari, Lord Krishna, is the only refuge for those whose minds have impurities, who live on ill-gotten gains, and who do not perform the enjoined rituals. This is what the Bhagavatas claim. And this is the sloka in the Bhagavatam. Okay? And Bhagavatam is not a Vaidika text. It's a kind of a Smriti Grantha. It is not the Shruti. Okay, this is to cater to the Vaishnavites. By the name of Hari, they mean the chanting of the Vishnu Sahasranama, Parayana, of other texts, Puja, etc. This is the only refuge in the Kali Yuga for those whose minds are the impurities of Punya, Papa, and likes and dislikes, Raga, Dveshas. They have accumulated wealth and power, which is not always fairly earned, but often at the cost of someone. In other yugas, the means for purification was the karma enjoined by the Veda, Vidhi Kriya. These daily 5 rituals, like Agnihotra, are not being done now. So what can people do to gain Antakarana Shuddhi? Only prayer. And the
1 second, let me put it up here. Nana, I'll take over, Nana.
okay.
And the form mentioned here is chanting the name of Hari. Prayer is the only means we have now for Antakarana Shuddhi, and any prayer is good enough, whether it is to Hari or Jesus. Remember, this is not for moksha, but for purifying the mind. That is the mistake they make in interpreting this verse. Their contention is that it is very difficult to meditate on the formless self, and therefore one should meditate on Saguna Brahma. This is the argument of modern Vedantis all over the world. They pay some lip service to Vedanta and then say that since it is very difficult to contemplate upon the Atma, you must raise your Kundalini to some chakra or the other, or do something else. There is no basis for this argument at all. Meditation upon Saguna Brahma is not as easy as they think. They say bhakti is easy, as though it is. Bhakti implies love, and when we cannot even love the people we know who have done so much for us, how are we supposed to love God? If you think knowledge is very difficult, but bhakti is easy, then go ahead, do bhakti. Do not talk about it. The question is, can you do bhakti? Bhakti is an attitude. Nobody does an attitude. Love is not an action. It is purely a noun. Even though there is the verbal expression, I love you, what it means is that I have love for you. If love were an action, I could do it whenever I wanted, like clapping my hands or putting on a hat. But it is not like that. It is not something I can command at will. They say it is easy, but the truth is it is as easy or difficult as anything else. It all depends on where you are, what you are. Bhakti is not in any way inferior to what we are talking about, in the sense that we have to start with prayer or worship of Saguna Brahma in some form. Whether we sing in praise of God or offer our prayers or do an elaborate ritual every day, it is fine. We have to keep doing that. But if we try to make a philosophy out of it, that is a different thing. A devotee does not talk about bhakti, and the ones who talk about it are not devotees. Such people are the propounders of meditation on Brahman with attributes, Saguna Brahma Upasakas. They are not committed to Saguna Brahma Upasana, but only to championing it. If they were really interested in Saguna Brahma Upasana, they would not have time for all of this. Who are these people? Shankara says, they are people who consider themselves scholars, not the people who are prayerful, but the people who talk. What do they say? They argue that because the Atma has no form, the mind cannot reach it. They accept that Atma does not have a form, but conclude on that basis that the mind cannot comprehend it. As the mind cannot grasp space, which is formless, similarly, because Atma has no form, the mind cannot grasp it. Therefore, it is very difficult to accomplish certainty in the knowledge, jnana nishta of the Atma. Their understanding of jnana nishta is that the knowledge of Atma should stay in the mind. If there is a particular form, like for instance, the form of Vishnu with Shankha, a conch, chakra, a disc, gada, a mace, etc., meditation on that form, and therefore this jnana nishta is possible, but not if there is no form. Shankara's answer to this. Shankara concedes that this is true for those who do not have a traditional teacher. Shankara is very careful here. It is difficult for those who have no guru and sampradaya. Even though one may study Vedanta, one cannot understand it just by studying the book. A teacher is necessary. And there are some who have a teacher, but that teacher himself has not been taught according to the tradition of teaching, sampradaya. This is a very well thought out method of teaching in which there is a beginning, an end, and a way of unfolding. A teacher who does not know this method can give you a mantra or some advice, but not Vedanta. It is a very great tragedy to have a teacher who is not able to teach properly, and such a teacher is bound to be confusing. Only Bhagavan can save a person in such a situation, because there is an emotional investment in one's teacher, which makes it very difficult to be objective and make proper choices. Therefore, when you choose a teacher, make sure that he has sampradaya, tradition. For those who do not have such a teacher, Shankara agrees that the certainty in knowledge of Atma, the jnana nishta, is very difficult to accomplish. It is also difficult for those with no preparation or have not done proper Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana. Then, having the right teacher alone is not enough. You must listen to him unfold Vedanta. For those who have not heard the Vedanta Shastra taught properly, certainty in the knowledge of Atma is also difficult to accomplish. Further, even though one has a traditional teacher and has listened to him teach Vedanta for some time, it is still possible that certainty in the knowledge of Atma is difficult to accomplish. Why? Some further preparation is required. And also for those whose minds are totally committed to external objects, atyanta bahirvishaya asakta buddhinam, this jnana nishta is very difficult. External objects include heaven also. You must know that. A person whose mind is preoccupied with externals has not yet discovered the proper value of things and does not have his priorities properly arranged. If Purushartha, what one really seeks in life, is not very well understood, then the mind is committed to varieties of things and does not stay with the pursuit. What is lacking is objectivity, vairagya, and mental composure, samadhana. Shankara says again that it is also difficult for those who have not put in proper effort with reference to pramanas. Pramaneshu akritta sramanam. Shramanam. Even if a seeker has all this, he or she still has to do manana. Suppose one has doubts, which is possible because here the whole thing is in the form of knowing. Knowledge has to be free from doubts, and to free it from doubts, one requires manana. For that, proper effort has to be made with reference to various pramanas like perception, inference, etc. You may have a doubt on the basis of experience or logic, and you must analyze what exactly created that doubt. What is the logic of the argument or the data on the basis of which the doubt occurred? That has to be analyzed. Otherwise, everything will seem all right, which means that nothing is all right. So, clarity in this knowledge is also difficult to accomplish for those who are not equipped to do this kind of analysis. If what Vedanta says is true, then every argument that is given against Vedanta must be fallacious. But the fallacy of the argument has to be seen. There cannot be any accommodation at all in this. Any conclusion that is different from what Vedanta says is not just different, it is contradictory. Vedanta says that you are Brahman. An opinion other than that is going to be just the opposite. For Brahman is limitless, and what is not Brahman is limited. Any other conclusion amounts to saying, I am limited. Whether you consider the self to be shunya, void, kshanika, momentary, baddha, bound, or anything else. That is why the Kenopanishad says, Iha chet avedit atha satyam asti. If anyone were to know here in this life about the Atma, then there is truth in his life. On the other hand, the Upanishad continues, Na chet iha avedit mahati vinashtihi. If one were not to know, then the loss is infinite. The reasoning is simple. If you commit a mistake about your being the infinite, the loss is infinite. Therefore, in order to negate all the notions about ourselves, we require manana. This is difficult for people who have not made adequate effort in employing the different means of knowledge and who seem to accept everything that is said as true. From this, we understand that certainty in the knowledge of Atma, being Brahman, is easy to attain for those who have a traditional teacher and have listened to him unfold Vedanta, if they also have a certain objectivity and are able to make proper and adequate use of the means of knowledge, the pramana. For a wise person, there is no real duality because the reality that was previously attributed to the knower-known situation is falsified. Other than the Atma, there is no second thing because the knower is non-separate from consciousness. The instrument of knowledge is non-separate from consciousness, and the known object is also non-separate from consciousness. From the standpoint of consciousness, there is no separation at all.
Hari Om. Brahmara,
Yes,
looks as though it will take some more time. Is that okay by all of you?
I'm perfectly fine.
Okay, go ahead.
Perfectly fine. Is it okay with you? It must be going into your dinner time.
The dinner is not all that important.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Should we go ahead? Okay.
Yeah.
Jnani sees no reality in empirical experiences. He will still have all the empirical experiences, but they now have no reality for him. In his vision, there is nothing other than Atma. This has been shown all over the Gita, and Shankara reminds us here of a verse in the 2nd chapter, which says that what all beings are awake to, the wise man sees as night. Yasyam jagrati bhutani sa nisha pashyato munehe. In other words, for those people who have a proper teacher and who can really analyze the Shastra properly, the meaning of the Shastra is like daylight. Just as you do not need to consult anyone about whether the sun is out or not, because it is not so very evident, so too for these people, the self-revealing self is as clear as daylight. For others who do not have these qualifications, it is like night. Thus, we have two visions here, and Shankara says that while there is nothing easier, it is also difficult if the preparation is inadequate. The elimination of Bheda Buddhi alone helps the Buddhi to abide in Atma Swarupa. Therefore, the means for knowing the nature of the self is only removal of the concept of difference in external forms. A mind which objectifies an external object is not a problem and is not opposed to Atma. But the notion of external and internal, that this is external and I am the knower, this notion of difference between the knower and the known is the problem. And this alone has to be removed. And the elimination of the conclusion of duality due to lack of discrimination is the cause for gaining the knowledge and also certainty in the knowledge of the nature of Atma. All that is necessary is the negation of the notion of difference, Bheda Buddhi. Why? Never for anyone is Atma not present. It is always available to everyone and therefore need not be reached, given up, or acquired. It is yourself, whether you know it or not. Everything you do is meant for Atma. Shankara will say later that all the objects, all the pursuits that you have are for the Atma. Everything is for Atma, even for the one who raises objections about the Atma. Therefore, everybody has the Atma and it is known to everybody. But what a person concludes about himself belongs to his mind. Some think about it and conclude wrongly, and some do not think about it and conclude wrongly. There is not much difference between the two. When we have lived with these funny notions for ages, and then someone comes and tells us that we are wrong, naturally, we do not want to feel foolish. In fact, the foolish person is the one who hangs on to these notions. The intelligent one, the courageous person, is the one who accepts that all these years he has been foolish. This is courage. In spite of all his investment of thought and heart in his notions, he is still able to say, I was wrong. That is intellectual honesty. That is real courage. And that courage is required. It is one thing to correct a person who is mistaken through lack of thinking. To make a person think is not a very big problem. But for the so-called thinking person to give up all the conclusions he has been nursing for so many years is very difficult. Thus, there is nothing to do here but remove all the errors about the Atma. This error removal culminates in the recognition of Atma being Brahman. You are not limited, but limitless, not unreal, but real, not ignorant, but the very nature of knowledge, not bound, but free. Because we have all these notions, the revealing of the nature of the self is in the form of negation. Reasons to show that Atma is always prasiddha. Atma is not unknown to anyone at any time. This removal of the notions of difference is the only way to appreciate the nature of the self, Atma, because Atma is never unavailable, aprasiddha, to anyone. It is always present and never totally unknown, for it is always appreciated as the meaning of the word I. Suppose there is an object which is to be known by a means of knowledge. That object may be known to you, may not be known, and even if it is known, it might be forgotten. All of this is possible. Atma, however, is not available for any of the means of knowledge we have at our disposal. Nor does it require any means of knowledge for when you say, I am, that is Atma. Atma is to be neither accomplished nor given up. This Atma, now Nana, here I have one doubt. Here it says, nor does it require any means of knowledge. But all along we have learned that pramana is required. Vedas are the pramanas, right?
The
So why
pramana is to negate all superimpositions.
Okay. So the actual knowledge, you don't require a means.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Atma is to be neither accomplished nor given up. This Atma is not something that is to be accomplished, not something that we have to reach, to create, or know through a means of knowledge. Neither can Atma be given up by us. We may give up a lot of things, but never Atma, for the one who gives up is Atma. This is where people can get into a problem. People want to give up the ego, ahankara, but it is just not possible because it is the ahankara that does the giving up. Giving up the ahankara is only possible by the knowledge that the ahankara is false. By knowing that the ahankara has an existence that depends upon the Atma, like the clay pot depends upon the clay, the ahankara is given up. There is no other surrender of the ego. The one who wants to surrender is not Satchid Ananda Atma. It is the ego alone. A devotee will daily surrender everything to the Lord, wealth, body, mind, senses, etc. Why every day? Why is once not enough? Because he cannot give up the ahankara, because it is not an object that you can give up. It is yourself. This does not mean that there are two Atmas either. There is only one Atma, either confused or enlightened. Whether Atma is looked upon as Satchidananda or the Ahankara, it cannot be given up by you, because either way, it is yourself. Being yourself, you can neither approach nor get away from Atma. If Atma is unknown, all activities will be meaningless. Then Shankara says that if this Atma were not there, aprasiddha, the undesirable consequence would be that all activity will be fruitless for the one who does it. All our activities are meant either to gain something or to get rid of something for ourselves. No matter what activity we undertake, it is only for our own sake. There is no such thing as doing something for the sake of another. If someone is in trouble and I try to help him or her out, it is for my own peace of mind. Any given mind has empathy, and therefore, if anyone is in pain, that pain becomes my pain. Naturally, I want to get rid of it. All actions, even altruistic ones, are centered on oneself. This means that if the self is not there, all action is absolutely fruitless. When Atma is not there, that is, when the doer or the enjoyer is not there, there is no purpose in any activity. Either you enjoy things or you do things in order to enjoy. These two, the enjoyer and the doer, go together and are mutually dependent. Enjoyment is not possible without the enjoyer. Much less is it possible without the agent to produce it. And the agent will not undertake an action if he is not going to be there to enjoy it. Any karma implies an agent, karta. Whether agency is real or not is another question. We are not eliminating the agent here, but the notion that Atma is the agent. Either a person is doing an action or enjoying the results of an action. The same Atma is either agent, karta, or enjoyer, bhokta. If that Atma is not there, aprasiddha, all activities become absolutely useless. Nor is this possible. Even if you accept that the activities can be useless, you still cannot perform an action
Some
without
problem is there.
It is just not possible. Therefore, Atma is prasiddha, and all the karmas we do are only for the prasiddha Atma. The fact that our life is full of activities proves that Atma is there. It is not an inference. Further, Shankara says that we cannot say that we do all these things for the sake of something that is inert, like the physical body. If I say that my body is not doing well and therefore I'm giving it some exercise or massage, it is not for the body's sake, it is for my sake. Even if I want to listen to music, it is not for the eardrum's sake. The eardrum does not want all these noises, etc. It is all for my sake alone. Therefore, it is not possible to even imagine that all the activities we do are meant for the body, etc. The body itself does not have any desire for any action to be performed on its behalf. The purpose of all activity resolves in reaching oneself. Then someone argues that even though it is true that activities are not for the body or the senses or the mind, because they are inert, still they are for the sake of some happiness. That is not totally true. Why? Because the purpose of all activity resolves in reaching the self. If a person performs an action to enjoy a result, it is so that he will be happy. It is all only for one's own sake, one's own happiness, not for an entity called happiness. Atma may be happiness, that is another thing, but all action is only for one's own happiness, not for the sake of happiness, sukha. Similarly, there is activity to eliminate pain, not for the sake of the pain, dukkha, but for one's own sake. It is always for Atma alone. The end, avasana, is reaching oneself, Atma avagati. Suppose you see an object, a flower, for example. The eyes pick up stimuli in the form of light reflected from the flower. They form a frame, which is the thought of the flower. Where does the object of the thought go and resolve? All objects, all forms, all sounds, all tastes, all smells, and all types of touch go and fall at the feet of Atma, consciousness, Chaitanya. Varieties of people, some who say nice words, some harsh words, all go and reach whom? Only Atma. If you are aware of the fact that all harsh words and all good words go and resolve in Atma, then there will be no excessive rejoicing or aversion. Na abhinandati, na dveshti. But suppose I do not know that Atma, Chaitanya, is myself, then I take myself to be the body, mind, sense complex, and thus, being small, either I feel bigger in the wake of something pleasant, or I react in the wake of something unpleasant. The harsh words people say bounce back, and there is a reaction. When 10 people are standing together and someone from behind calls John or Mary, one of them may turn around. But if someone calls idiot, all of them will turn. Everyone has a doubt inside about himself or herself, and therefore there is a reaction. But if you analyze it, the word idiot was received by the mind, and that particular object was illumined by Chaitanya Atma. The word, having given you the meaning in the form of a thought, vritti, just resolves immediately. Where does it resolve? Only in the Chaitanya Atma. Therefore, all activities have their end in you. Their only purpose is to reach Atma, nowhere else. Suppose you do some good karma like performing a ritual. To whom does the result of the ritual go? Only to Atma. A result of any kind, punya, papa, sukha, dukkha, drishta or adrishta, goes to Atma alone. All activity, vyavahara, has its end only in reaching you. In seeing any object, the sight has its end in reaching you. In hearing the shabda, sound has its end in reaching you. Therefore, all activities have the status of reaching you, the Atma, finally. Whether it is a known you or an unknown you, a well understood you or a not very well understood you, it is very much there. Prasiddha. Whether enlightened or not, all activity always reaches you. Whatever we do, even our simple daily routine, is all done for the sake of our own fulfillment. My daily walk is not meant for the park. It is not that without seeing me, the park will suffer, and therefore I walk there. It is for my sake. Every activity has its end in Atma alone. Think it over. That is why it is said, Atmanastu kamaya sarvam priyam bhavati, isn't it, Nana?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And that was told by one husband to his dear wife.
Mm.
And he tells very clearly, hey Maitreyi, if you love me, it's not for my sake, it is for your sake. Because not loving me, you will feel unhappy. You do not want to feel unhappy. You want to feel happy all the time. So you tend to love me. Atmanastu kamaya sarvam priyam bhavati. Yeah, continue.
Even if the person is enlightened and therefore seeing everything as himself, when he reaches out to do something for someone, it is all only for Atma. There is no one else. Lord Krishna says, there is nothing for me to accomplish which I have not yet accomplished. Yet I remain always in activity. Na anavaptam avaptavyam varta eva cha karmani. Whether it is as a result of the prayers of the people or because it is a thing to be done, even Lord Krishna's actions resolve into Atma alone, and they leave it untouched. Therefore, Krishna said, Namam karmani limpanti. Even the notion of I, the ahankara, finally goes to the Atma. Atma is well accomplished for the discriminating. Shankara now establishes here that gaining certainty in the knowledge of Atma is very well accomplished, suprasiddha, for those who are discriminating. Suppose you want to distinctly understand a given object among other objects. Your eyes converge upon the object, creating the sight of the object, and that sight excludes every other object. This is called pramana parichedana. By a given pramana, that is the eyes, the object is parichinna, limited in the sense that it is the object of your sight, which excludes every other object. Now, in order to know my own physical body, what kind of pramana must I use? Perception, inference. Though the eyes see the body all right, they only see the attributes of the body, like its color, etc. And further, if the eyes are blind, I still know that this is my body. Even if the eyes can see, but there is total darkness, I do not go searching for my body in the dark. Impossible. In order to distinguish my body from every other body, no pramana is necessary because there is no confusion. Just as you search out your own shoes or umbrella or coat from among those of others, do you search for your own body? Nobody has this problem. Why? Because it is never away from your presence, from you, the witness, Sakshi, once you are awake. When you are sleeping, you do not search for your body because the body does not come into the picture. And when you are dreaming, you have a body of your own there and have no occasion to search for this one. When you are awake, you are not searching for this body because you search for something only when it is away from you, or though there, still not recognized. But here, there is no such thing because it is known by you, the witness, and because one sense organ, the sense of touch, covers the entire body, no other means of knowledge, pramana, is required to distinguish your body from all other bodies. As no pramana is necessary to know one's body, no pramana is necessary to know the Atma. When the various means of knowledge like inference, etc., are not necessary to know your physical body, how much more is this true for Atma, which is even closer to you than the body. The body, though it is known by the witness, Sakshi Vedya, is still an object of your consciousness, but Atma is just you. There is nothing more inner or closer than that. However, it is not inner in the sense of some interior place to be reached. Time, space, all the sense organs are all simply Atma, in that they have their being in Atma Chaitanya alone. It is not like the inner chamber, Antapura, that is the queen's quarters in a palace. There you have to cross all sorts of corridors and gatekeepers, and then women gatekeepers, and room after room, until finally you can see the queen. You do not, in a similar way, first have to cross the Annamaya Kosha, then the Pranamaya Kosha, the Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and finally Anandamaya Kosha, until you finally see Atma sitting there glowing. There is no such thing. Anything you see at any level, wherever you look, that sight itself, that object has its being in the Atma. Nothing is away from the Atma. Therefore, whether it is a sound heard or a sight seen or any form of experience you have at any time, whether you are thinking foolishly or in a very enlightened way, Atma is the basis, like the water is the basis of the wave. Atma being the innermost, Antaratma is simply the basis of everything, while it itself neither has nor requires any other basis. Being the ear of the ear, eye of the eye, mind of the mind, Shrotrasya Shrotram, Chakshusha Chakshuhu, Manaso Manaha. Atma is therefore said to be the innermost. For the recognition of that Atma, you do not require any pramana, not perception, inference, etc., or even the Veda. Why? Because all recognition is due to the presence of Atma. Therefore, gaining certainty in the recognition of the Atma by negating what is not is very well accomplished for discriminative people. Without Atma Chaitanya, no knowledge is possible. Therefore, Atma is prasiddha. Further, it has to be accepted that knowledge is always present. The knowledge that is consciousness has no form, nirakara. Generally, knowledge has a form, an object, sakara. There are some who say that knowledge that does not have an object, that is jnana, which is nirakara, cannot be known. It is apratyaksha. In this contention, Atma, which is pure consciousness, which has no form whatsoever, cannot be known. Even those who hold such a view, Shankara says, have to accept that knowledge is always present, since knowledge of an object is always through knowledge. Gaining the knowledge of an object always implies the presence of formless knowledge. It must be there in order to gain the consciousness of a pot, for example, because a pot is nothing but consciousness plus a given name and form, nama rupa. To gain knowledge of a pot, there must be another knowledge which does not have any form. If that knowledge also has a form, its form will get superimposed upon the pot, and the pot knowledge will be defective. No so-called object knowledge is possible without the objectless consciousness. That consciousness joins every object, so that object consciousness is nothing but objectless consciousness plus a so-called object mixed together. Without objectless consciousness, there is no object consciousness. Therefore, objectless consciousness is always present, prasiddha. Shankara likens it to the presence of happiness, sukha, or sorrow, dukkha. You do not need to operate any means of knowledge to know your own happiness or sorrow. Its presence is evident to you. Similarly, Atma is always evident to you without requiring any means of knowledge pramana. It is that in whose presence alone all activity involving a means of knowledge, object of knowledge, and so on take place. Without Atma Chaitanya, no desire is possible. Therefore, Atma is prasiddha. Shankara gives further reasoning for this. If consciousness is not absolutely present, there would be no desire to know anything, because a desire to know is not tenable without the presence of the knower. If Atma is totally unknown to you, if it is not self-evident, who is going to inquire? The one who is going to inquire is indeed the Atma, consciousness, and therefore a desire to know anything, including the Atma, the consciousness, is not tenable. I cannot say that I have a desire to know consciousness, because to say that, I must be consciousness. Suppose I say that consciousness is an object that I have to know. It is the object of my desire to know, like a pot, for instance. Then we have to ask whether the one who wants to know is a conscious being or not. No person who wants to know can be inert. Hence, it has to be conceded that the person is conscious. Since the person is conscious, how can that consciousness be an object of a means of knowledge through which he or she is going to understand this consciousness? Being the nature, svarupa, of the very inquirer, consciousness is not something that one desires to know. One can desire to know Brahman, but not Atma. That is why the Shastra says, Athato Brahma Jignasa. Therefore, thereafter, there is the desire to know Brahman. Atma does not become the object of inquiry. It is the consciousness because of which one knows everything else. Let us look at this again more closely. If this consciousness, which is the nature of the Atma, is not evident, what will happen? Then one would have a desire to know it, like any other object to be known. If the consciousness, that is the Atma, is something that is not known, then it becomes an object which you have got to know and requires a means of knowledge in order to be known. Just as a pot, for instance, becomes an object of inquiry. Similarly, consciousness would become an object to inquire into and know. Is there such a thing? No, there is no such thing. If there is someone to whom consciousness is unknown, that person has to be inert. And if he's inert, how is he going to have a desire to know anything? Something inert cannot even wish to know a pot, let alone consciousness. Consciousness is the nature of the self. No one has any doubt about it. No one wonders if he or she is a conscious being or not. Even if one thinks over the matter and concludes that one is not conscious, only a conscious being can make that conclusion. Something inert is not going to conclude that it is inert or conscious. Therefore, since it is not inquired into, it is evident that consciousness is self-evident. There are some people who
I have
believe...
a question. Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Can I ask a doubt here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you put it off to tomorrow?
Okay.
Yeah.
There are some people who believe that there is a super consciousness beyond the body, mind, sense complex and are searching for it in all seriousness. They will be searching for eternity and still missing it because the one who is searching is the only consciousness there is. Therefore, because consciousness does not become the object of a desire to know, it is totally self-evident. There is no living being to whom consciousness is not present. Even a mosquito is aware of itself. It may not know the word mosquito, but it is able to recognize other mosquitoes, even though there are so many insects of the size of a mosquito. To that extent, it is self-conscious. Thus, since consciousness is always present, so also Shankara says is the knower. In the one who wants to know something, consciousness is already present as a knower. Then, in order to know a given object, he employs an appropriate means of knowledge. Suppose you have to see a form or a color. What do? You do not close your eyes and try to see the color through your ear. You always open your eyes because you know that the eyes are the appropriate means of knowledge here. Who is the person that handles the means of knowledge? It is the knower, jnata, in whom consciousness is present. Thus, the knower also is not unknown, but present, prasiddha. Nobody finds it necessary to use a means of knowledge to discover the knower, because it is never absent when there is something to be known. Consciousness assumes the status of a knower with reference to an object to be known, and therefore becomes, as it were, the knower, jnata. In conclusion, Shankara says that because of all this, no effort is to be made in self-knowledge. In fact, in any knowledge, there is no effort. If the object of knowledge and the means of knowledge are there, knowledge takes place effortlessly. At least, operation of a means of knowledge, pramana vyapara, is required in empirical knowledge. But in the knowledge that one is conscious, no operation of a pramana is required. But the Shastra says that Atma is Brahman, which is nothing but consciousness. To know that, all that is necessary is to remove from Atma the notion of what is not the self, says Shankara. Because Atma is Brahman, if it is taken for anything other than that, naturally Atma becomes not Brahman, a Brahma. Therefore, all that has to be done is the removal of the notion of I in the Anatma. All the inquiry we do is only to negate the Atma Buddhi, I notion in the Anatma. Any analysis that we do to remove doubts, etc., is only for that. We are not creating Brahman or embellishing the consciousness that is Atma to make it become Brahman. Atma is Brahman, which is limitless, being as it is, pure consciousness. Thus, knowledge in the form of negation or dropping is required. Which is more difficult in this world, lifting or dropping? Lifting is difficult. Dropping is no problem at all. All you have to do is let go. Now tell me, is samsara good for you or bad for you? If it is good for you, dropping it is going to be difficult. If it is like a hot potato, how difficult is it? What effort is required? Do you have to consult somebody? If samsara is fraught with pain, dukkha, what should you do? Drop it. Where is the difficulty? Like a hot potato, we have to drop all the notions we have about Atma. That is why Shankara says finally that Jnana Nishta is the most easy thing to accomplish. So Sampadya, there is no difficulty there at all. Why should we have two words, Jnana and Jnana Nishta? At the same time, the mind seems to want to hold on to things which are clearly not good for one and all. There is always someone who, even though holding a hot potato, keeps holding on to it, all the while complaining, it is so hot, it is so hot. What shall I do? He says he wants to drop it, but it does not fall from his hand. The mind also seems to be like this. We do not know whether we are holding on to things or they are holding on to us. It is something like a person who was sitting on the bank of the river, which was full and deep. He wanted to reach the opposite shore, but did not know how to swim. Then he saw something that looked like a log of wood, which came floating down the river. Slipping into the water, grabbed hold of it. He was so happy, thinking that he would be able to reach the other shore now. Then he found that his log of wood had a pair of hands and was grabbing him. He thought he had grabbed the log of wood, but the log of wood was grabbing him. He had grabbed onto a bear. What he thought was a solution to his difficulty turned out to be even more of a problem. Now he wants to get out of its grip, but it is not that easy. He can neither let go of it nor get along with it. This is what we call samsara. We keep holding on to our notions even though the nature of the self is self-evident, and that is the nature of Brahman. All the words that indicate the nature of Brahman or the self, like Satya, Jnana, Ananta or Shuddha, pure, Buddha, enlightened, Mukta, free, etc., are only to eliminate the I notion that we have in what is not I, Anatma. These words that are the Lakshana of Brahman are meant to negate the varieties of notions we have about the Atma based upon the Anatma. The properties of one have been superimposed upon the other, and that has to be sorted out. Even though the whole pursuit is in the form of dropping, and we do have the capacity to drop, there seem to be some difficulties. People tell me all the time that they understand this teaching very well, but still they are in pain. Not physical pain, but mental pain. This is only because of an incapacity to drop things. Why should they not drop something that is hurting them? They want to drop it. Nobody wants to have pain. What causes mental pain after all? It is nothing but a particular form of thinking. We do not even need to drop that thinking. We just need to understand that this thinking is just thinking. Then you will find that you have nothing to do with pain. Just let the thinking be. You need not bother about it. Removal of the obstructions to gaining the result of jnana is jnana nishta. If in spite of understanding this, a person is not able to drop his notions, we have to say that the knowledge has some obstruction. The psychology of the human mind has its own logic, its own truth, and therefore we have what we call a commitment to the pursuit of knowledge, jnana nishta. Knowledge, jnana, is good enough. The conscious Atma is self-evident, and that consciousness Atma is myself, which is Brahman. It is so simple, but at the same time, there seems to be some difficulty. Therefore, the word nishta is added to jnana. It is all based on the experience of seekers. It is against all logic, really speaking, because when Atma is consciousness and that Atma is Brahman, all you require is discrimination between Atma and Anatma. Atma, Anatma, Viveka. The Shastra is the means of knowledge, Pramana, which makes it very clear that the self, Atma, is Brahman. It is eternal, Nitya. It is pure, Shuddha. It is limitless, Ananta. It is unattached to anything, Asanga. It is free, Mukta. It is the basis for everything. The Adhishtana, the truth of everything. The Satya, without which there is nothing. All that is here is Brahman, and you are that Brahman. Where is the problem? Every word is clear. Still, even though a seeker has a proper teacher and has listened to the Shastra from that teacher, he or she goes on complaining. What does it mean? Seekers have their own experience, which defies all logic. The role of Shravana in removing the obstructions. Shankara recognizes this. The Shastra recognizes this. And all the teachers, acharyas, recognize this. Therefore, the Shastra says, the self, my dear, is to be seen, inquired into, analyzed, and contemplated upon. Atma va are drashtavyaha, shrotavyaha, mantavyaha, nididhyasitavyaha. The first two, seen and listened about, should be enough. The self is always present, prasiddha, but as a doer and an enjoyer, in a word, as a samsari. It has to be known as Brahman, which is not subject to any problem, for which we should give up the I notion in what is not I, anatma, and remove all doubts about it through listening to the Shastra. The word shru, to hear or listen, has the meaning of inquiring, vicharane. The Shastra says that Atma, which is Brahman, is not a samsari. That Shastra is in the form of words and therefore has to be analyzed and understood by you. Only two instructions should be enough here. First, Atma is to be seen, drashtavyaha. That is to draw our attention to both our confusion and the solution. We have a confusion about the Atma, thinking that it is a samsari, and that is why we have to know the Atma. That is the solution. What should we do to know the Atma? Listen to, inquire into the Shastra, shrotavyaha. That is enough. It is listening to the Shastra, it is revealed that Atma is Brahman, and the operation of the pramana to know Atma is complete. It is like analyzing a transparent object to see if it is glass, a glass bead, or a crystal. All you have to do is go close to it and check the properties of it, its weight, etc. That is enough. It is over. Similarly, to know Atma, you need to analyze it properly, and for that, you require a mirror. An ordinary mirror will only reveal that you are the body, etc. You already know that. Such a mirror can perhaps give me a little more detail, but to know what I am, if there is a confusion, I require another type of mirror which will reveal the real me. That mirror is in the form of words and is called Vedanta. When I look into the word mirror that is called Vedanta, what do I see? Satchid Ananda Atma. Through the word mirror, I recognize that Atma is Param Brahma. Then what should I do? Shastra reveals that Atma is Brahman. No effort is required for that knowledge to take place. The role of manana in removing the obstructions. In spite of that, even though there is no effort to be made, still the Shastra recognizes that people do not always come away knowing the Atma just because they listen to the Shastra. Sometimes it only creates more doubt. A person may have had some doubts about himself before listening to the Shastra, but listening seems to have created new doubts because he is turning his attention towards himself. Previously, his problem was whether somebody loved him or not. Now he wonders, do I love myself? All because of the Vedanta Shastra. This is very natural because Vedanta turns everything towards yourself. Vedanta says you are nothing but love. There is no reason for you not to love yourself. But this fellow says, I do not love myself. I am only 5 feet 6 inches and I don't like it at all. What does it mean? This fellow has a confusion about Atma. He thinks it is the body. If the body is Atma, how can you love yourself? And if the mind is Atma, of course you cannot love yourself. And again, there are others who will protest that you cannot be Ishvara, since you are not omniscient, etc. Initially, you had your own doubts about yourself, and there were ordinary people to confirm them. But now you find there are philosophers, religious people, and even huge organizations with millions of followers confirming your misgivings about yourself. When all these people are protesting against your being Brahman, there is a pressure to conform. At least in listening to Vedanta, I thought, I'm not that bad. When the rishis say that I'm wonderful, definitely I cannot dismiss their desirable vision and conclude the opposite, that I'm not wonderful. But when all these people gang up against me, perhaps it is better to be one of the gang. Otherwise, I'm one against so many. I am as lonely as non-dual Brahman. What Vedanta says is so desirable because it tells me I'm Ananda, I'm everything. And there seems to be some logic to it, and also the confirmation of my own experience. No matter how depressed I may have been, there has always been moments when I laughed with abandon at a joke. What does it mean? I have to do an analysis, manana, and compare what all these various schools of thought that challenge the vision of Vedanta say to my own insight about myself, and determine which is true in the light of what the Shastra says. I have to determine if there is any truth in what they say or not. It all has to be thoroughly analyzed. Therefore, the Shastra says, Atma va are mantavyaha. Sometimes you will hear people say that they have a conviction that Atma is Brahman. Those who have great conviction in the Atma Jnana are all victims of wrong thinking. I can have a conviction that I will go to hell. That is okay. But Atma Jnana has nothing to do with conviction. Conviction is mental. It is some kind of a thinking, some kind of hope, etc., which moves you to commit yourself to something. But this is not a matter for conviction. I know what I am. Then what? I have no problem. The role of Nididhyasana in removing the obstructions. After years of studying Vedanta, we can see people saying, I know I am Brahman, but the but seems to remain. The first but is, am I Brahman? Then one says, yes, the Shastra says so, and it is made clear by inquiring into the Shastra, by Shravana. And now the second but comes up. But am I really what the Shastra says? That doubt is also removed by analyzing what the Shastra says by Manana. After Manana, it looks as though one has to admit that I do know that I am Brahman. But the but seems to continue. Then what is the problem? Then the third but comes up, and one says, Swamiji, I know that I am Brahman, but I do not behave like I am Brahman. I still have fear, worry, etc. If I am Brahman, how can I get worried? This is because the knowledge that I am the limitless Brahman, full and complete, is not yet completely owned up. This owning up requires sitting down quietly and owning up this fact about myself and removing all subtle obstructions that prevent this owning up. This is called Nididhyasana. The obstructions are always due to old habit. I have the age-old habit of considering myself to be small and insignificant. Worry comes out of the small I, not out of the big I. In fact, worry, concern, anxiety, panic are all born of the child in us. It is not even the small person, it is the smallest, the child. Even though the body has grown to become an adult, a child remains buried under the adulthood. When you reach 40, it begins to probe its way to the surface. It can wait for 40 years, not more than that. After that, it cannot remain hidden any longer. Thus, there seems to be a condition in which your experience is opposed to what you know, a viparita bhavana. It is purely due to childhood. That is why we can call it a habit or kashaya. We can call it anything as long as we understand that it is all from the past. It has nothing to do with the present. Events of the present only serve as a trigger to awaken unresolved issues from the past. The anger that comes for the small thing that happened today is not appropriate to what happened today. Even an ordinary person who does not know anything about Brahman can see that the anger that the situation evokes is too great for the situation. It is something like hanging a person for a traffic violation. The reaction is not appropriate at all. Therefore, we understand there is some kashaya, or whatever you want to call it, from the past. By the past, we do not mean past karma. That can only create situations wherein you can feel happy or unhappy, depending upon your own disposition. It can give you a disease or some external mishap, etc., which are not conducive for comfortable living. But it cannot give sorrow, dukkha, that comes purely from yourself. And the self is Brahman, in which any situation is simply absorbed. Where is the question of a reaction of anger, etc.? The one who is free and full, who knows he is Brahman, cannot be angry. Once two Swamis that I know, one was perhaps in his 40s, the other in his 50s, were discussing some verses in Viveka Chudamani, where there is a description of a jnani, a wise person. The description of the wise person by the Shastra is meant to be a prashamsa, praise, and not to make any judgment about who is a jnani. The description is purely meant to inspire a person so that he would love to become a jnani and therefore pursue knowledge. And sometimes in the description of a jnani, we understand the nature of the knowledge itself. And so it becomes a means to reveal the vastu. One of these Swamis, the older one, was explaining the meaning of a verse describing a jnani. The younger one, who was a little better educated, said, Swamiji, how can we discuss what a jnani is unless we are jnanis ourselves? At this question, the older Swami got very angry. How can you say that I am not a jnani? He said, and he walked out. Later, he left that place for good. This kind of behavior is all due to childhood problems. The issue here is not what makes a jnani or who is a jnani, but what is this knowledge, jnana. Atma is Brahman. Either you know this fact or you do not know it. Nobody can say anything about this. Even to say I am a jnani is a silly thing. The one who knows that he is Brahman will not say he is a jnani. He will say, I am Brahman. Whether one is a jnani or an ajnani is not a matter for discussion. It is a matter of understanding what the knowledge is, a process of learning and getting clarity. It is silly to say somebody is enlightened and somebody is not enlightened. We are not here to make a judgment about anybody nor about ourselves. I neither say anything about myself nor about others. Free from judgment, I simply enjoy the process of knowing. Where is the question of judgment? It is not that on a particular day I got up enlightened. Atma is always present, Nitya Siddha. It is not an event. Shastra says that you are always enlightened, Nitya Buddha, always liberated, Nitya Mukta. So where is the problem? How can anyone say that he got enlightened at a particular time on a particular day? It is not that suddenly everything becomes clear. You are always enlightened. On superficial analysis, the situation in which the elder Swami got angry looks justifiable because according to him, he is a jnani and somebody insinuated that he is not. But on the other hand, if one looks carefully, it is not justifiable at all. That is why the other Swami said, if he is a jnani, he is fulfilled, aptakami, and there should be no anger. For an aptakami, situations that make others angry are like one drop of water dropping into the ocean. What will happen? Nothing. It just gets lost. Similarly, if you are limitless, akhandam Brahma, what is it that he is going to respond to? If at all there is response, it will be laughter, some joy, some empathy, compassion, love can be there. Where is anger? There is no possibility at all. Perhaps the Swami who got angry did have the understanding of the Shastra. In spite of understanding, if there is still inappropriate anger, inappropriate hatred, and inappropriate sorrow, we call that viparita bhavana. For that, we have contemplation on what we know, nididhyasana. Thus, the Shastra says, Atma va are nididhyasitavyaha. The Atma has to be contemplated upon, and all the viparita bhavanas have to be removed by this contemplation. With that in view, the Shastra adds one more word, jnana nishtha. This jnana nishtha is a knowledge which has no obstruction whatsoever. Why is such a word necessary? Because of the experience of the seekers, mumukshus. It is not logical at all, but that is how it is. Without taking this into account, there are some teachers who will just advise a seeker who has some problem to dismiss it all as mithya. If he says he feels bad, the teacher will ask him, what is bad? Your body, your mind, Atma? There is no badness. It is all mithya. Forget it. This is all correct, but it is a thing to be understood, not passed off as advice in a cryptic sentence. Neither the person who uses that sentence knows anything, nor does the one who receives the sentence gains anything. They just have some words. That this is mithya or maya is a thing to be discovered. It is not a matter for advice. If it is handled by advice, the problem remains a problem. The Shastra recognizes the problem and shows us how to address it through a life of prayer, proper attitude, and finally by what is called nididhyasana, contemplation. It is this contemplation that removes the notion we have of ourselves that is opposed to what we know, viparita bhavana, and leads to jnana nishtha. Introduction to the next verses. From now on, we are going to see some verses which talk about what we have to do to gain this jnana nishtha. It is a summary of that part of the 6th chapter that talks about meditation, put here in a different form in a few words. There are 3 types of knowledge with reference to Atma, the self. One is paroksha jnana, indirect knowledge of the fact that the self is Brahman, limitless. This is really not knowledge, but shraddha in what the Shastra says. It is a belief that Atma is essentially independent of the body, mind, sense complex and is identical with limitless Brahman. Then, by exposure to the teaching of the Shastra from a teacher who handles it as a pramana, the cognition, vritti jnana, that I am Brahman, aham brahmasmi takes place. As the Shastra tells it, the listener discovers this fact. If the person has all the necessary qualifications, there is no obstruction to this knowledge. This is clear, immediate knowledge, aparoksha jnana. But the cognition, vritti jnana, can be opposed by obstructions, pratibandhakas, because it involves the self, Atma. If the knowledge is of an object, once you have the vritti jnana, you know it for certain. There is no further problem. There may be some difficulty in gaining the initial cognition, as in understanding the equation on relativity, E equals mc squared. This is not an ordinary equation. It takes a lot of knowledge of physics to understand it. Even though there are obstructions to understand an equation like this, once known, it is known. But in spite of having understood that I am Brahman, there can be obstructions to clarity because aham is involved. The problem is that there is an orientation of I being something entirely different that stands opposed to the fact that I is free from all forms of limitation. In spite of the vritti jnana, aham can appear opposed to that cognition created by the Shastra. This is knowledge with obstructions. Sab pratibandhaka jnana. The pursuit of jnana nishtha is for the sake of removing these obstructions and for gaining certainty of this knowledge of Atma. It involves manana and nididhyasana and is usually coupled with a lifestyle sannyasa. The next 3 verses tell us this jnana nishtha, tell us how this jnana nishtha is to be pursued.
Thank you. Very well done, both of you. Sorry, it has taken a lot of time. You know, maybe it is well worth it. I have barged on to your manana session completely and even overtook your manana session time also. I'm so sorry. Yeah, we'll meet again tomorrow. And tell Sumaji whatever question she has got, she can raise tomorrow. We will do justice to that. Hari Om, everybody. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramayah, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om, all of you.
Hari Om, धन्यवाद.
Hari Om, Nana. Dhanyavad. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Hari Om.